Requirements for correspondent relationships. Due diligence requirements for correspondent banking and similar relationships. Financial institutions, FIs, are required to implement specific due diligence measures concerning correspondent banking relationships and other similar relationships, regardless of whether these involve foreign or domestic financial institutions. The guidance provided below outlines the necessary steps and considerations that FIs should apply to these relationships, which can include securities transactions or funds transfers. 1. Prohibition on correspondent relationships with shell banks. Shell banks defined. A shell bank is defined as a bank that has no physical presence in the country in which it is incorporated and licensed, and is unaffiliated with a regulated financial group that is subject to effective consolidated supervision. Prohibition. FIs are prohibited from entering into or maintaining correspondent relationships with shell banks or with institutions that permit their accounts to be used by shell banks. 2. Information collection and evaluation. Understanding the correspondent institution. FIs must collect sufficient information about any receiving correspondent institution to fully understand the nature of its business. FIs must determine the institution's reputation and the effectiveness of its AML CFT controls using publicly available information, including checking whether it has been subject to any MLFT investigation or regulatory action. Evaluation of AML CFT controls. FIs must evaluate the AML CFT controls applied by the receiving correspondent institution to ensure they are adequate and effective. Senior management approval. FIs are required to obtain approval from senior management before establishing any new correspondent relationships. Understanding responsibilities. FIs must understand the responsibilities of each institution involved in combating money laundering, terrorism financing, and illegal organizations. 3. Consideration of regulatory and supervisory environments. Variation in regulatory environments. FIs should recognize that regulatory and supervisory environments vary significantly worldwide, and not all foreign financial institutions are subject to the same AML CFT requirements as those in the UAE. Higher MLFT risk. Some foreign institutions may pose a higher MLFT risk due to less stringent regulations. To mitigate these risks, FIs should implement procedures to assess and periodically review the regulatory and supervisory frameworks of the countries where these foreign institutions operate. 4. Assessment of financial institutions in correspondent relationships. Nature, size, and structure. FIs should assess the nature, size, and extent of the business of financial institutions with which they maintain correspondent relationships. This includes understanding the institution's ownership and management structures, with particular attention to any involvement of politically exposed persons, PEPs. Shell bank characteristics and downstream services. FIs must evaluate whether the correspondent institution exhibits characteristics of a shell bank and whether it offers downstream correspondent services, also known as nested accounts, to other banks. FIs should understand the types of services offered, the number and types of financial institutions to which they are provided, the types of customers those institutions serve, and the associated MLFT risks. 5. Information gathering and risk assessment. Correspondent Relationships Questionnaire. To collect sufficient information and assess the MLFT risks associated with a financial institution, FIs should use a suitable correspondent relationships questionnaire and conduct follow-up interviews when necessary. The Wolfsberg Group's Correspondent Banking Questionnaire and the Wolfsberg Anti-Money Laundering Principles for Correspondent Banking are recommended resources. Periodic review and updating. FIs must periodically review and update their due diligence information concerning financial institutions with which they maintain correspondent relationships, ensuring that these reviews are commensurate with the risks involved. Addressing risk profile deterioration. If there is a deterioration in the risk profile of a financial institution with which a correspondent relationship is maintained, including the discovery of adverse information, FIs must inform senior management and take appropriate risk-based measures to assess and mitigate the associated ML/FT risks. 6. Maintaining agreements or contracts. Clear responsibilities. FIs must maintain agreements or contracts with financial institutions with which they have correspondent relationships. These agreements should clearly outline operational details concerning the products and services covered. Define each party's responsibilities regarding ML/FT risk mitigation. Detail the conditions related to any permitted third-party usage of the correspondent account.